Welcome to the Vital Spirit podcast. I'm Dr. Kelly Livingston, a naturopathic physician and your guide to a new health reality, one that connects body, mind, and spirit. Together, we'll dive deep into the art and science of holistic healing. Through working with hundreds of women through midlife transitions, I've discovered something profound. Most of our physical and emotional challenges are rooted in a maladaptive stress response, and true healing begins when we regulate our nervous system. Each episode will explore complex health topics in simple, empowering ways, uncover the deeper wisdom within each of us, and share practical tools for nervous system regulation to help you awaken your vital force and create lasting wellness. So, if you're ready to reconnect with yourself, your health, and your purpose, let's begin this journey together so you can experience life more fully human and deeply healed. If you've ever been told you just need hormones, this is your map for what to fix first. Welcome back to part 2 of our HPA Axis deep dive. I'm Dr. Kelly Livingston, and this is the Vital Spirit podcast. In part 1, we reframed midlife symptoms through a systems lens. Your hormones are messengers, and the HPA axis is the conductor. Today, we're going to get really practical. I'll walk you first through the exact labs that I run, how I interpret them, and how those results shape a terrain-first plan. We'll also zoom out to the spiritual physiology of the hypothalamus, pituitary, and pineal gland, because your chemistry follows your consciousness. And we'll get more granular with how to apply some depth psychology practices to go through midlife more fully human and deeply healed versus numb and disconnected. I'm so glad that you're here. So let's recap why the HPA axis first matters. You met my patient last week, mid-30s, 1 year postpartum, exhausted, hair shedding, cystic acne. She had those irregular heavy periods, anxiety, weight that wouldn't budge, and she was offered birth control again and again. Now, I recognize that birth control is obviously different than menopause hormone replacement therapy, but you're going to gather that there's a theme here in these last 2 episodes, right? And that is that the terrain comes first. So same playbook from her teens, handed the same drug, but a different decade. And to me, we deserve better as women. So when we looked more in depth at what was going on with her, we saw that she had ferritin of 11. Remember, that was really, really low. Classic picture of hair loss and fatigue. And she had an HSCRP, or that high sensitivity C-reactive protein, of a 3.2. So she had this low level of smoldering inflammation going on. She had a DHEA sulfate of 42, so that was really low for her age. And it showed me that her adrenal reserves were depleted. She had a pregnenolone of 100, so that's the lower end of normal range, and potentially can indicate that there's some less than ideal levels of resilience going on in that person's terrain. She had an omega-3 index of 5%. That was suboptimal for mood and inflammation. And she had a red blood cell magnesium of 4.8, which was also borderline. And you might see relaxation and recovery struggle or suffer when magnesium is low. She had come in with some previous blood work done that showed an elevated prolactin levels. She had some fluctuating estrogen levels. She had an elevated sex hormone binding globulin, the protein that binds your sex hormones, and typically that will be elevated post-birth control. She had a normal free T4, I believe, and a normal fasting glucose, although it was a little bit toward the higher end of normal. And she had a normal fasting insulin. So at that point, I wasn't too worried about her blood sugar. Her stool test told me the rest of the story. She had an elevated beta-glucuronidase. Remember, that's going to impact our estrogen detoxification. She had a high fecal secretory IgA, so that's showing mucosal immune activation or inflammation inside the gut. And she had low short-chain fatty acids. So those provide essentially fuel for the gut cells. And when they're low, they can be linked to low mood. And she also had some constipation as a symptom of this. And I certainly was looking at her as someone who really needed to support those detox and elimination pathways. So clearly, that's not just, hey, you need more estrogen, right? That's HPA axis dysregulation. That's a bottleneck of toxic clearance, so issues with constipation and detox. And that's nutrient depletion, right? So that's why we start with the HPA axis first. So if you're following along and you want to know, okay, Dr. Kelly, what is your HPA first lab panel? What and why are we running these labs? So here we go. I'll use this lab panel for women who feel wired but tired, emotionally flat, brain foggy, definitely if sleep is struggling and if there are mood issues. And yes, I do check pregnenolone in all women because it's such a powerful resilience signal. So first things first is I will run pregnenolone. Typically, this has not been run. It's become something that I really like to track in women over time. I've had the honor of working with many women for over 10 years. So maybe they came to me first for fertility and now we're working through perimenopause, which is so cool. So definitely know your pregnenolone numbers. Pregnenolone is that mother hormone, that precursor hormone. It's important for memory, mood, hormone flexibility. It is what becomes all the rest of your sex hormones. So when it is low, it typically is a sign that the system is stressed and that resilience is fragile. Then that DHEA sulfate that you've heard me mention, this buffers cortisol's catabolic effects. So low values of DHEA are going to be associated with brain fog, low libido, low energy, low motivation, slow recovery. So again, it's something that I'm looking at optimizing immediately when I'm working with a patient, and it gives me a glimpse into how their body's stress physiology is responding. In our case that we're using as an example, she had a pregnenolone of 100 and a DHEAS of 42. So I knew I was going to be working on her HPA axis health. And you can kind of think about it as rebuilding your stress reserves. And I really recommend that you look at your daily cortisol curve. So you're looking at cortisol in the morning, you're watching the curve and seeing if it comes down throughout the day, flat lines at night, and that's when you go to sleep and your melatonin comes up. I care more about the rhythm of this cortisol curve than a single number. So if you just go and get cortisol in your blood, that is just a snapshot of one point in time when you got that blood drawn. So I much prefer looking at a salivary cortisol curve. So you might have symptoms of being wired but tired. You might have an inverted cortisol curve. You might have what I've talked about before, that up, down cortisol curve. And cortisol and your circadian rhythm essentially are going to map directly onto your experience of sleep, mood, cravings, even immune system swings. So we're going to run a full thyroid panel, right? You can go back and listen to our episode on thyroid. And that includes not just your TSH, your thyroid stimulating hormone, but yes, your free T4, your free T3, your reverse T3, your thyroid antibodies. Remember that stress and higher cortisol production can actually inhibit conversion from T4 to T3. So you don't have as much active thyroid doing its job in your body. And low ferritin and potentially low selenium, if that's something that you have as a nutrient deficiency, are going to create an issue where you have poor conversion to T3, that active thyroid hormone. So in this patient, it was interesting, right? If she had low iron and potentially high cortisol, that's what's then pausing some of the conversion of T4 to T3 in these patients who maybe have never had a full workup done and now they're struggling with energy, and it's not even truly a thyroid issue. They don't even have thyroid antibodies, but it's actually an iron deficiency issue. So you can see there's always a layer. There's always healing, and health is kind of like an onion. There's always something underneath that we can uncover. And then remember that full iron panel. So that does include ferritin, your storage form of iron. When ferritin is below a 50, women tend to feel tired. Hair loss is going to be one of the most common symptoms I see of that. And her ferritin at an 11 means that her body was feeling oxygen starved. So no pill is going to substitute for oxygen delivery in the body. Next, I want a really good idea about how much inflammation is going on in the body, in the terrain. So yes, I'm going to run that high sensitivity CRP, C-reactive protein, and homocysteine. So, homocysteine is not only going to indicate inflammation in the body, but it can also indicate how well we are methylating or detoxing. And I'm certainly going to look at certain nutrients that are key in both sex and stress hormones, which, of course, is a huge part of the HPA axis. So, some of those nutrients are going to be omega 3s, red blood cell magnesium, zinc, selenium, CoQ10, vitamin D, B12, and folate. And essentially, these are all important for thyroid conversion, metabolism, mitochondrial output, energy. So, these are all, in my opinion, important screening labs when you're considering HPA axis dysfunction. And then, I love a good poop test, right? So, looking at that gut liver hormone axis, the gut brain axis. Is this person detoxing estrogen? Is this person's gut inflamed? What do their short chain fatty acids look like? How is their microbiome health? How are their lactobacillus levels if they're a woman who struggles with UTIs or yeast infections? So there's so much information that we can get from a comprehensive stool analysis as well. So the take home, the clinical pearl here is that I really wish all women, before being handed a hormone, were given the chance to look at their HPA axis health and to look at, can your system even clear hormones safely? So if you're following along and maybe you have some of your labs in front of you, look at your DHEA. If it's low or if your pregnenolone is low, then your HPA axis is spent and you might have low mood, low drive or motivation, poor recovery time, lower libido, sex drive. You might be more sensitive to stress and emotional dysregulation. If you have low ferritin, as we said, you might be experiencing hair loss, that chronic fatigue. Very often, I will say to women when they first come in and they say they're tired, I'll say, it's low ferritin until proven otherwise. It's just so common to be deficient. And thyroid meds won't fix this. Hormones won't fix this. And again, that CRP means there's inflammation. The terrain is irritated. And as we cool that inflammatory fire, so many symptoms tend to resolve. So as you make lifestyle changes, as you make dietary changes, you can track that inflammation over time. And it's a really rewarding process to see those numbers go down. Maybe you're looking at your omega panel and your red blood cell magnesium panel, and you see, oh, my omega fatty acids are deficient. Let's focus on getting these into the diet. Let's have lots more salmon or walnuts or hemp seeds or chia seeds and flax seeds and get all those healthy fats into our diet and make sure that we're maybe supplementing with some magnesium glycinate at night. That's going to help us sleep. So there's so many clues along the way if we get curious and we look into some of the contributing factors that create a healthy terrain and set us up for success. And again, most importantly, if you're constipated, if you're bloated, if you have digestive issues, certainly if you have a high beta-glucuronidase on that stool test, then we know that estrogen recirculation is an issue. We know that your heavy or irregular cycles might be due to that. Remember, along with that low ferritin. And if we have an inflamed gut and we have a starved microbiome, then we know that we don't have all of the ingredients that our hormones need to be healthy. So we always start with the terrain. We support the terrain first, and we don't throw hormones into a clogged system. So if she had just gone on birth control, for example, for her heavy period, and she never addressed any of these other root issues, then when she shows up in my office in perimenopause 10 years later, maybe on more prescriptions masking other symptoms, and these root causes were never addressed, then they turn into issues in the future. And in honoring the principle of prevention, this is just never how we practice at Roots Deep Medicine. Okay, so I rambled through so many labs, right? But those are really, really important labs to assess when you're wondering about the health of your HPA axis. And so what does a terrain focus plan actually look like once we have those labs? I'm going to talk about nervous system regulation, right? So I really love to build nervous system regulation into the day. And let's say I looked at her cortisol curve and I knew, okay, we really need to work on getting cortisol down in the afternoon and evening. I might recommend a strategy like yoga nidra or non-sleep deep rest or a yin yoga class for 10 to 20 minutes at the end of the day when I want that cortisol to really be coming down, getting ready for sleep. sleep. I might recommend that she find someone that she feels really comfortable and safe co-regulating with at that time of day. It can be a partner, it can be a friend, it could be a pet. And I'm definitely going to balance out that evening circadian rhythm focus on calming with a focus in the morning time of increasing a healthy cortisol response. You need cortisol to start your day and deal with the stressors of the day. So within 30 minutes of waking, I'm going to ask her to get outside, expose her eyes to actual sunlight outside, not inside. And I'm going to remind her at night when she's working on calming that cortisol curve to be dimming her screens, to be dimming the lights. I've said before how my daughter and I love to dim the lights at night after dinner, and we have Christmas tree lights strung up around our kitchen, and it's really nice. And our circadian rhythm is super happy. Our cortisol's coming down, our melatonin's coming up. And she also was focusing throughout this plan on timing her meals around circadian rhythm as well. So when we're working on our HPA axis, it's really important to have a protein forward breakfast within 60 to 90 minutes of waking. And that's going to stabilize our blood sugar, which is going to help stabilize our cortisol response. I really wanted her to prevent any sort of hypoglycemia crashes. So she was having regular meals throughout the day. And she was doing a little bit of a caffeine audit in the beginning, making sure that she was consuming her caffeine before noon and never when she was fasting, because that was going to just bump that cortisol dysregulation a bit more. We did focus on estrogen clearance with 30 to 40 grams of fiber per day. We talked all about eating the rainbow and getting 30 plants in her diet per week. And remember, that means fruits and veggies and nuts and seeds and herbs and spices, and making sure that she was getting lots of resistant starches in the diet as well. So cooled potatoes, green bananas, lentils and legumes. She focused a lot in the beginning on cruciferous vegetables and allium, so garlic and onion, which are going to support phase 2 detoxification. And she got really good at making sure that she had lots of awesome hormone supportive seeds in her diet. So you've all heard me talk about hemp seeds. I love hemp seeds. She also had a rotation of flax and chia seeds daily, and was starting her meals with bitter herbs like arugula, ginger, radicchio. Sometimes she started her meals with lemon water, and definitely making sure that she was hydrated. So these diet and lifestyle changes sound kind of simple, but they have a really profound cumulative effect. We did a short-term microbiome rebuild. So we did really focus on the probiotic support that she showed a need for in her stool test. So that was very individualized. And we had a prebiotic rotation. So prebiotics feed the probiotics. So they're the substrate that probiotics grow on. And as I said, we supported estrogen detox and clearance with diet, but we did also add in some calcium glucarate. She was doing castor oil packs a couple times a week. And I genuinely feel like if you are not pooping and you are not eliminating, then it doesn't make sense to me to add more hormones to the system. So these were some of our first steps in working together. She also did use some omega-3 fatty acid supplementation. So she was taking some fish oil to bump that omega fatty acid profile up because it was a little bit deficient. And we did focus on adrenal support and energy and stress response. So we used individualized herbs for that. If I'm remembering correctly, I think we had used some rhodiola and ashwagandha at different points in working together. And I did remind her to have healthy expectations around timing of symptom management, for example. So I knew that as we got her ferritin up, her periods would likely be less heavy, but I also knew that it might take a little bit longer for things to shift, like her hair. So hair loss is one of those things where it can take a little bit of time as you resolve the root cause or issue to see changes in actual physical hair presentation. So with less thinning and less hair falling out. And that was a big goal of hers. And I think it's important to remind women to have healthy expectations around timelines and when some of these symptoms might shift. So we were definitely tracking trends. And then that lends me to the conversation around, okay, well, Dr. Kelly, do I need hormone replacement therapy, right? So through perimenopause and then through menopause, so many women are asking me, am I a good candidate for hormone replacement therapy? So Certainly, before I go through all of this HPA Axis work, if a patient came to me and was unable to sleep, completely dysregulated, struggling with their mental and physical health in a way that was impacting their daily life, and I thought hormones would help essentially alleviate some of those symptoms immediately so that we can do work on the terrain, of course, I would say hormones may help. And I would refer them out to a prescribing physician. This is why care is so individualized. And this is why I spend so long taking time to get to know my patients so I can answer this question intelligently, right? But say you were listening to a podcast like you are, and you're not directly working with me, and you wanted to have some clues around, do I have a green flag go ahead to begin some hormone replacement therapy or menopausal hormone therapy? Or are there other things that can be worked on first? Here are some of the things that I would consider. So some green flags would be daily bowel movements, ferritin at normal levels. So ideally at least a 50 to a 70. I would like to see less inflammation in the body. So things like that CRP number trending down. I would like to see the cortisol rhythm stabilized, ideally beta glucuronidase normalized, and a really healthy circadian rhythm and sleep pattern, and definitely healthy blood sugar regulation. Because if all of those things are still chaotic, you're just on a roller coaster of inflammation, blood sugar dysregulation, potentially low ferritin, right? So we want to clean up that terrain so we have a clear picture of, are you even still symptomatic, or have we actually resolved some of those symptoms by addressing the terrain? And then some yellow flags might be that you have some partial progress in those areas. So maybe you still have some dysregulated blood sugar, but you're pooping now, you're not constipated, you're clearing hormones, you're kind of active in that process. I'd say that's more of a kind of proceed with caution. And then red flag, so not ready to add hormones to the system, would be when ferritin is still low, if beta glucuronidase is still really high and you're constipated, if DHEA and pregnenolone are super low. Those are like a faucet, turning on a faucet for your hormones, right? They're precursors to your sex hormones. Sometimes just turning on that faucet and giving the body what it needs achieves the results that you're looking for. Definitely a red flag if there's severe blood sugar dysregulation. There's so much that can be done to work on that first. So we're not throwing hormones into a clogged, dysregulated system is really the take-home message. Because I want to be crystal clear that my opinion on this has been formed from practicing in the state of Connecticut as a licensed naturopathic physician. So because of my scope of practice in Connecticut, I don't prescribe hormones. My zone of genius, and therefore the heart of the Vital Spirit method, is terrain first care. It's vitalistic naturopathic medicine. So restoring nervous system safety, supporting gut liver clearance, thyroid conversion, micronutrients, circadian rhythm, the HPA Axis health, right? That's where I'm the right person to guide patients. And I do tell every patient deliberately, and honestly, I have a blind spot here and it's not because hormones are bad, but it's because my role is to make sure your body and your terrain is ready for any therapy you choose, and that you're making an informed, values-aligned decision. You're not just being told this is the only option. Many hormone supports, especially bioidentical estradiol and micronized progesterone, are safe and appropriate for so many women when the terrain is prepared, when dosing is individualized, when clearance pathways are working. So I'll certainly have a dedicated episode on the Women's Health Initiative study, how some of the original messaging around hormone therapy overgeneralized risks. And really those risks were from the equine or horse estrogen they were using, from the synthetic progestins they were using, which is not the same as bioidentical hormones or modern rhythmic dosing strategies, right? So the takeaway is that for me, I'm going to work on mimicking nature when it comes to hormone therapy. I'm going to honor the rhythm of our hormones. And I'm definitely going to recommend that patients personalize dose and route. And hormone therapy can absolutely be a wise tool for symptom relief in some cases. It can be a wise tool for prevention and optimal health, but it absolutely, in my opinion, should be used in sequence with the naturopathic therapeutic order. So if after working on the terrain and optimizing labs and symptoms, your goal is still hormone replacement or menopausal hormone therapy, I'll definitely collaborate with prescribing physicians or at least refer patients out to a prescribing physician. And again, I'm going to be really honest with patients about my zone of genius being helping your body receive any therapy wisely and to keep that HPA axis conductor steady while the orchestra does what it needs to do and plays beautiful music. Let's widen the lens a little bit and look at the HPA axis through Jungian and depth psychology. Because remember, midlife isn't just a hormonal shift, it's an initiation. And Jung called the great work of the second half of life this life individuation, right? So becoming more whole by integrating what's been exiled, the shadow, the unlived life, the parts we've over identified with or disowned. And in depth work, symptoms are meaningful. They're messages from the psyche, right? They're trying to move us into wholeness. So if we map that onto physiology, the amygdala, which is that inner sentinel, is really quick to alarm when unknown approaches or unfamiliar and we don't feel safe. The hypothalamus, remember, that threshold keeper, so deciding is that safe or not. The pituitary is translating that meaning into chemistry, sending actual hormonal messages out, telling the body what hormones to make. And the adrenals are kind of like our warriors. They're mobilizing energy for the task at hand. So in midlife, when our people-pleasing strategies or our perfectionism that I'm always mentioning, when our behaviors around keeping ourselves feeling safe are no longer working for us, the psyche says no more. Sometimes that manifests as an Epstein-Barr virus flare, as chronic fatigue, as anxiety or depression. But what we're feeling as anxiety or this wired, tired feeling can be the physiology of a life that needs to be kind of reauthored. And maybe we need to take stock of some of those behaviors that weren't serving us, that were constantly upregulating our stress response, or that were just keeping us feeling safe and not actually helping us fulfill our purpose. So I think adding the lens of depth psychology here can help highlight the steps on this journey that you might experience. So it takes away some of the scariness and some of the fear. So midlife is a liminal space. You're not who you were before. You're not yet who you're becoming. And this can feel unstable. And our HPA axis, our stress response, does not like ambiguity. We want to know, right? And so our work is to create these daily rituals of safety, these cues of safety, so the body can tolerate the mystery of what's unfolding, so the body can tolerate the fluctuations of hormones. So practically speaking, that does look like getting outside in the morning, having a nervous system regulating ritual, predictable timing of meals, darkness in the evening, somatic rituals that tell the hypothalamus, we're cool, we're safe, we're stable, right? And when it comes to our shadow work or projections, if we refuse to feel, the body will often feel for us. So again, that relentless caretaking of midlife where we're just doing things for others, we're not taking time for ourselves, we're not taking time to feel the uncomfortable feelings sometimes. Maybe there is unspoken anger we're suppressing, right? That just keeps our cortisol simmering. It keeps our HPA axis dysregulated. So a journal prompt you could take and utilize at home on your own might be, what truth about my energy, desires, or limiting beliefs have I been refusing to name? How have I been participating in my HPA axis dysregulation? What would truth telling cost and what would it save if I got more honest around my boundaries or when I'm feeling depleted? What information might that provide for me? Okay, so now we know if we have a green flag or a red flag for moving forward with hormone therapy. We also know what are some of the other things that we can be looking into to optimize our terrain, right? So your brain, your hypothalamus and pituitary and pineal gland, is essentially the bridge between emotion and hormone. So your brain, remember, your hypothalamus is receiving information about the environment. So it's listening to input about light, about food, about safety, belonging, right? Your pituitary, that conductor, is translating these inputs and essentially turning them into hormones. So it's sending messages out to your body to now respond to these inputs. And your pineal gland is really important in your circadian rhythm, and I would say in symbolic sight. So melatonin is made from the pineal gland, but it's not just important for sleep. It's also a mitochondrial antioxidant, and it really regulates our circadian timing and rhythm. So it's not lost on me that this is also where your third eye resides. We can go down that rabbit hole in another episode, but it is so, so very important when I'm working with patients for us to really recognize the power that light input has to this whole system. So getting outside in natural light in the morning and dimming our light around us at night is really, really, really important. And I want you to remember that if we numb the HPA axis, we're not just blunting symptoms, but really are blunting our capacity for spiritual and psychic expansion, because there's so much to tap into in this entire physiological system. And it is such an important communication pathway, but it also has really kind of far reaching impact, I think, in our ability to tap into other abilities such as clairvoyance or finding meaning in how we feel and how our chemistry is changing and connecting with what our soul is trying to tell us. So I really feel that in the healing process, when you're working on experiencing life fully human and deeply healed, it is so important to cultivate an ability to communicate with this HPA axis versus just running from or numbing the pain that dysregulation of the HPA axis can manifest as. And traditional healing systems like Ayurveda, traditional Chinese medicine, always have treated the body as interconnected ecosystems in this way. Mind, body, spirit, nature, they're all intertwined. Modern science is the one that's really catching up with these systems, biology-based medicines and healing lineages. And all of them really focus on this gut brain psychoneuroendocrine axis connection, right? I love this term that kind of synthesizes all of this, and that's the phytoneuroendocrine system. So that's essentially how phytochemicals in plants interact with our neuroendocrine network to influence neurotransmitters, hormones, circadian timing, mood. We are inextricably linked with nature, and the HPA axis is the intersecting point between how we experience the world and how that turns into an internal experience mentally, emotionally, and then also spiritually. So we have chronobiotic polyphenols, so think colorful plants, so eating the rainbow, right? And these can help regulate clock genes and the hypothalamus pituitary pineal axis. And I think one thing to keep in mind about this is that seasonality matters. So polyphenol profiles shift with light and the amount of light that those plants are getting, and with temperature and stress. And so eating in season can even better match our innate natural human rhythms. And polyphenols also modulate neurotransmitters, inflammation, oxidative stress, the microbiome, GABA signaling, our calming inhibitory neurotransmitter. So this to me is a really cool bridge between plants and psyche. So aligning with nature, eating in season, eating in timing with your circadian rhythm, having plant diversity in our diet. This is how we can be more endocrine literate, I think, and how food becomes a really subtle signal to the HPA axis. So now we're thinking all about our physical plane of existence, optimizing our labs, that HPA First lab interpretation guide, which you can download on your own. We're focused on our daily seeds of health habits. We're thinking about how our environment impacts our mood and our sleep. But there's more to this puzzle, of course. So through midlife, as we are no longer ovulating, as our body's no longer preparing us for pregnancy, you're often going to hear me talking about this as kind of an invitation or an initiation. In Jungian depth psychology, we might call this process individuation. So as roles shift, as we can get more focused on our health awakening journey, our psyche is starting to ask, okay, what's essential now? So biologically, that HPA axis is asking you, am I safe, right? But spiritually, yourself or your inner guide is asking, is this true? Am I true? Am I authentic? So first, I would say the first half of life, we're seeking safety and ego identity, and then we're seeking authenticity. So when cortisol is dictating your days and you're in fight or flight and dysregulated and your stress responses off the charts, the symbolic life narrows. It's a lot harder to have those conversations. I've talked about this before. But when the parasympathetic returns and is back online, then our ability to focus on meaning in life, our window of tolerance opens and our field of meaning opens as well. So we have these shadow states, right? You've heard me talk about unprocessed stress or trauma, maybe people pleasing patterns or perfectionism. These shadow patterns are often the same things that are draining or dysregulating our HPA axis. And as we become more aware of those, you're going to actually see changes physiologically when you do the deeper inner work mentally and emotionally. And the threshold or the window of tolerance is going to get bigger. So you're going to see symptoms less quickly. So as you prepare physiologically for perimenopause and menopause, if you are also preparing psychologically, you're going to see less hot flashes, less sleep disruption. The signs or the messages from your body don't have to be as loud because they haven't been suppressed. And so daily practices that give rhythm to this, so focusing on natural light, focusing on breath, timing your meals, really prioritizing sleep, and giving the psyche ritual through this, through maybe journaling, time outside in nature, maybe a nervous system regulating practice daily. This is really grounding that rhythm so that as things get more chaotic with hormones, you have the stability of your HPA axis to come back to. And symptoms are symbols, right? So when we treat the physiology, then we're much more able to listen to these messages. And healing becomes about communication with self, about wholeness, not just the absence of symptoms or symptom suppression. So bringing it back to our example patient, her labs showed us the terrain. They showed us what we had to work on the physical plane. And through clearing those, she was able to get more communication with her HPA axis and with her internal guides and her inner knowing. And as we worked on lifestyles, restoring the rhythm of her HPA axis and circadian rhythm, she was able to tap into deeper layers and levels of meaning in her life. So this is how HPA axis and environment becomes hormones. It's why HPA axis comes before hormones. So if you want my exact checklist to get started on your own, you can grab the lab interpretation guide in the show notes, and you can use this episode as a starting point to learn more about your HPA axis health. I think it's a perfect place to start if you struggle with sleep or low energy, and it's exactly what I use in practice. And if you're ready for help mapping your terrain out, you can book a strategy session with me and we'll look at your HPA axis, your gut liver clearance, your thyroid, and your nervous system before you make decisions about hormones. And you can definitely always get started on your own by downloading my free vagal tone guide and my Seeds of Health journal, all which are geared toward HPA axis health. Because you deserve more than symptom suppression. You deserve an orchestra that's tuned and a conductor that's steady.